Hi.
Hi. Okay, we're just going to do a sound check. And um, how we start these is actually to just have you already share your screen from the get go.
Okay.
And I know you
Right.
have the intro
That's what I'm going
set
to do.
already.
Let me see if I find the right one.
That's good.
That seems to be the right one.
Okay.
I think that this is the one you want, right?
Yes. So you'll just leave that one up for the intro
Yeah.
to the series, and then we'll go into your intro, your face as you're speaking.
Okay. Okay.
Guy that's here to help with any audio. Thank you.
Okay. So there's going to be a mixture of people on site and online.
Yes. Yeah, we have a live stream. Um, so they're not going to be on Zoom, but there is a live stream. And then there are people in the room, yes. Unfortunately,
Okay.
you can't see them all.
Right. Right. Okay. Just put myself on mute.
Hi, Dr. Bergman. This is Jim Goodwin. I'm going to be introducing you in about 2 minutes. Okay. All right. Cool. That's good. Questions from people online via what? Hi, welcome everyone to the last lecture in the 23rd year of the Lefeber Hughes Winter Series on Aging, right? 29th year. So it's the 29th annual Winter Series on Aging, and this is the last lecture. So thank you all for coming. And we're delighted tonight to have Dr. Howard Bergman, who's been at McGill University in Canada, sort of the foremost university in Canada, for many years. He is a family medicine physician, a geriatrician, and he's a professor of family medicine and geriatrics and also oncology, as well as being a professor in the School of Public Health there. His career has been very interesting. Because I guess I should mention he's not actually at McGill right now. Right now he's in France, so I think it's 1 a.m. or something like that. So we'll see how he does. See how heavy his meal was. But he's had a very interesting career in that he's focused a lot of his work on fitness and on frailty in the elderly, sort of fitness and frailty. And it's been kind of the whole spectrum in terms of like, how do you define it? And he's done some work on sort of rigorous definitions of those concepts, how to measure it. And he's certainly done quite a bit on that. And then how to promote fitness and delay frailty. And because he's been doing that work, what makes him sort of stand out is that he's taken that to the next step, which is implementation, in that he's been an advisor to the provincial governments and to the federal government in Canada on programs for the elderly, community-based programs to promote fitness, medical models to, new medical models to treat frailty. And so he's done very, very interesting work, and he's won all sorts of prizes, but most of them are in French, and I'd mess up the pronunciation. So welcome, Dr. Bergman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very prestigious invitation. And yes, I am in France, and it's midnight now. I'm in the south of France, and strangely enough, there's a heat wave in Montreal, and the temperature in Montreal is not very much colder than in the south of France at the present time. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to accept this invitation. It would have been more fun to be with you in person, but Zoom is the next best thing. So let me then just go into the presentation that I'm going to give today, which is just let me get rid of this so I can see my screen completely. Basically, I'm going to speak to you about the health promotion and prevention for Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. Um, and just as disclosure, unfortunately, I have no financial relationship with any commercial interest related to this presentation. I do have funding from our NIH, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. I'm the author of the Quebec Alzheimer Plan in 2009 at the request of the Quebec Minister of Health, and more recently was named by the minister to lead the preparation of the first Quebec government Alzheimer ministerial policy. And I'm a member of the World Dementia Council. So just, the usual statistics that you know about, so I'm not going to insist that there's a lot of people with dementia worldwide. The numbers are increasing. Even though, interesting enough, there's evidence for decreasing incidence. But what's interesting in this slide, I'm not going to deal with it in this talk, is the fact that the greatest number of people with dementia are in low and middle income countries. And we need to think about that more widely as we talk about policy. I have the numbers here for Canada. It's the same numbers for United States, except multiplied, I think, by 10 or even more. The number of people living with dementia, 2020, about 600,000, and going up to 1.7 million 2050. But Yogi Berra, one of my mentors, said, prediction is very hard, especially about the future. So whether that 1.7 million or that increase is going to be so rapid is not certain because of the advent of treatment, of prevention, etc. And we're hoping that number is not going to be as high as predicted. But those are the numbers that you know about. We don't have to dwell upon that. We know that one of the most important risk factors for dementia is increasing age. Close to 1/3 of people over 80, 85 have one form of dementia or another. One statistic that very much influenced the ministers was that 1 out of 5 baby boomers would develop dementia in their lifetime. So it's a very important disease, very important condition, and has important implications in our societies, in our healthcare systems, in our families, and for the people, obviously, who have this terrible disease. And so it's not surprising that the World Health Organization and various other international organizations have said that dementia prevention is a global priority. In the Alzheimer plan that I wrote in 2009, we talked about prevention, but I'm not sure we really believed it. We put it there because we had to talk about prevention. But I think now, and this is what I want to talk to you about, I think now there's more and more evidence to show that, in fact, the potential impact of health promotion and prevention can be extremely important. And so, early, if we go back about 20, 30 years or so, there was great hope for developing biomarkers for early diagnosis and Alzheimer's dementia therapy, disease modifying a medication. This is what the picture looked like. Um, However, if we looked at what really happened is, yes, we have more and more biomarkers. I don't think they're not quite ready for clinical prime time yet, but we have more and more biomarkers for early diagnosis. But we haven't really advanced in terms of a disease-modifying dementia therapy. I'm going to come to some of the latest evolution in that domain, but it hasn't really come to fruition as much as we expected. And if we look at the projected targets, the pathophysiology, there's a whole list and I'm not going to go into that because this is not the objective of this lecture, but you can see it really raises the complexity of the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Amyloid, of course, being one of the important targets, but there are many basic scientists who do not believe that amyloid is the cause and rather see it as an effect. There's tau, synaptic activity, neurotransmitters, failed neural protection, oxidative stress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People have been talking about diabetes, and so you can see that although we have a lot of hope for the development of disease-modifying medications, the complexity is there. The complexity is there, and we haven't really broken through that complexity. And so I cannot talk about prevention without talking about the monoclonal antibody medications, the anti-amyloid monoclonal antibody medications, because I suppose we have to consider medication as part of prevention, but I can't not talk about it. So we know that there's been controversial approval in your country and in Japan, and there's ongoing approval processes by European and Canadian authorities. What seems to be clear for many, but not all, is that these medications, and I'm talking about lecanemab in particular, but they're the other MABs as well, may be biologically effective in removing amyloid, but not really clinically effective on cognition or function. And in fact, one study, and it's really, you can't really compare, but one study tried to do a type of comparison that sort of, it may not be more effective than donepezil. And we have a few failed, a few that didn't fail, but generally the clinical impact, you really need a microscope to see the clinical impact. In the context of serious toxicity, and in fact, there are certain studies that suggest it may accelerate brain atrophy and compromise long-term brain health. So a lot of important issues. The medication itself is very expensive. And what is perhaps even more expensive is the complex and expensive and high-tech biomarker and imaging and follow-up and monitoring that is required. So an initial PET, initial MRI, 4 MRIs per year, and requiring high-skilled, high-tech infrastructure to deal with adverse events. And now we're seeing pressure, and there's an interesting article in the LA Times, pressure for asymptomatic testing. So testing in people who do not have any symptoms at all. And that, again, we don't have time, that's not the objective of this talk. So for a medication that is at best marginally effective, there's serious issues of equity, and in my healthcare system, equity is an essential element There's equity to access for people in rural populations, equity because of cost, equity because of burden, equity in terms of ethnic groups, etc. The guidelines exclude vulnerable populations not represented in the clinical trials. So the clinical trials, and in many clinical trials, basically over-selected white, highly educated, higher socioeconomic status, few other chronic diseases. And so these have led to the guidelines, and in fact, the guidelines are excluding the population that perhaps need them the most. There's a tremendous financial and resource burden to our healthcare systems and to individuals, and the potential billions of dollars diverge from other treatment and research because we know that our healthcare dollars in both our systems are not infinite. And you have there a whole series of references, but we know that this is a very important ongoing debate in our scientific community. So I was saying that, from a point of view of pathophysiology, it's complex. From the point of view of contributing factors, Alzheimer's and dementia is complex. We look at the different contributing factors. And we also know that the disease does not start the day that you start to have memory problems. And that's another very important issue is when does it start? When can we identify it, etc. So the complexity of this disease or this syndrome that we call dementia, dominated by Alzheimer's disease, or we also talk about Alzheimer's and related disorders. So we've had a series of Canadian consensus conference on dementias and on dementia. And one of the important conclusions, and there's nothing revolutionary about that. I think most groups are saying the same thing, that lifestyle changes and non-pharmacological treatment may also contribute to preventing or at least slowing down the disease as well. And so while we're striving, and I want to emphasize the importance of the work that is being done, the research to find disease-modifying medications, there are things that we can do in terms of, and that have shown promising results in terms of health promotion and prevention. And that's what I want to talk about today. And to say that, what I wrote in 2009, without really believing it, I think there's more and more evidence now that leads us to saying we need to believe it, and we need to develop programs which will contribute to the prevention and to lowering the incidence of Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. And so probably the most important articles came out in Lancet Neurology, the Livingston paper, where it was mentioned that up to 40% of Alzheimer's could be prevented. And you can see here some of the population attributable risk, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, etc. A whole series of early life factors, midlife factors, and even late life factors. And I'm going to talk about some of these, contributing to the potential for health promotion and prevention in preventing the onset, or if the onset, in slowing down the progression of the disease. And so this is another way of expressing the same issues of certain factors leading to reduced neuropathological damage, other factors leading to increased and maintained cognitive reserve, What keeps coming up is diabetes, hypertension, and blood lipids. But you know, prevention of head injury, that's been a long-standing, smoking, hair pollution, obesity, coming back to the cardiometabolic has really become something important. Exercise, and something new that has come out, a very interesting literature on hearing impairment and treating hearing impairment as a way of maintaining, increasing and maintaining cognitive reserve. So I just want to look at hypertension for 1 second, and just to show the potential um, of health promotion and prevention. So I see patients in a memory clinic, and it struck me, and this is anecdotal, an anecdote is not evidence, but it struck me that about 95 or 99% of the patients I see have either with Alzheimer's or MCI have either hypertension, diabetes, or dyslipidemia, or generally two of the three. And I know this is selection, and they're older people, and so older people have more hypertension, etc., diabetes. But it's interesting to see that, and we look worldwide, 80% of people with hypertension are not adequately treated. And then I looked in both our countries, and it's not a competition. But look at the potential of percentage of adults of 30 to 79 with untreated hypertension. Close to a third. That's a lot of people. And look at the percentage with treated hypertension but not controlled, 40 to 50% in our countries. The contribution of hypertension, not just to vascular dementia, but to Alzheimer's disease, is extremely important. So we can see here the potential for primary and secondary prevention. But here's another very interesting, you know, we used to say the horse is out of the barn. The person is old, 80, you know, not really that important to treat the hypertension because what's happened has happened. But this study shows that antihypertensive use was associated with decreased dementia risk compared with individuals with untreated hypertension through all ages in late life. And the exact numbers are not important for the moment, but treated hypertension, people with treated hypertension, older ages, had no increased risk versus healthy controls. So these numbers are powerful evidence of getting at one of the important contributing factors to dementia, hypertension. And change is possible. If we look at stroke, there's been an important decrease in stroke rates over the past 30 years. And the decrease was due to decrease in blood pressure, so increased blood pressure control, and smoking, although in spite of the increase in BMI and diabetes. So it shows that change is possible and can contribute, in this case, to decreased stroke. And if you look at this study, very recent, 1 week of low sodium diet resulted in average 8 milligram reduction in 8 millimeter reduction in systolic blood pressure versus a high sodium diet. Again, this is powerful evidence that prevention is possible and prevention can lead to changes. And then there's the work that Mia Kiribelto, the famous finger studies that has uh, 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 studies that are being done on very many countries across the world. There's one that's developing in Canada, focusing on people already at very high risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, high risk in terms of, uh, of cardiometabolic factors, etc. So focusing on that group, and they've had they've had very interesting results. If we had those results for medications, people would be jumping up and down. And then there's uh, uh, the movement to develop brain health. Vladimir Shinsky is a well-known Canadian neurologist who's been one of the leading advocates of brain health. And I'm not going to go into the details, but also with evidence that this does lead to prevention of neurological diseases like Alzheimer's disease. So this is evidence. The next question really is how can we move from evidence in research to to policy and to implementation and to change? Because it's one thing to do a targeted research project like Fingers, targeted research program on hypertension. It's another thing to generalize it into a healthcare system. I like this. I like this this graphic because what it shows is, most of us are focused on hospitalization, and people are hospitalized, and in fact, our training, it's starting to change now, but is really focused on the academic medical center, and this article showed that in fact less than 1 in 1,000 in a population is actually in an academic medical center. So most people are in the community. Most people are in the community. Most people are not in the hospital. Most people are not even receiving, not even an outpatient clinic. And that is where we have to direct our efforts if we're going to make change. And so we need to think of a multimodal approach. And this multimodal approach will, and this is not exhaustive in terms of factors, will include societal factors like infant and maternal health, education, socioeconomic status. In Canada, there have been important public measures that have lifted many children out of poverty, for example. Accessibility to healthcare, even education, which we take for granted, is not as accessible as we think. And then there's the lifestyle changes in terms of nutrition, tobacco, exercise, social interaction, alcohol, and then primary and secondary prevention of the cardiometabolic factors. So just these are some of the factors, the multimodal approach. Now, what I want to bring up now is when we think of this approach to prevention and promotion, it's extremely important that we look at this, look at the reality behind the numbers. So in high-income countries like our two countries, the average incidence and prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, like for many other chronic diseases, does not tell the whole story. And in reality, there's a higher incidence and prevalence in low-income, low-education groups and other vulnerable population compared to the high high income, high education. So, we talk about the prevalence of Alzheimer's is 8% over of people over 65, 30 to 33% over age 85. That's an average. And in fact, it's lower in high income, high education, and much higher in low income, low education. So, and in fact, also, it's been shown that vulnerable neighborhoods, have significantly higher rates of cardiovascular risk factors, hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, and diseases, coronary and stroke, compared with those in the bottom quartile. So the association between environmental burden and cardiovascular health was more pronounced in socially vulnerable neighborhoods. So coming to Mary Tinetti, and I think there are geriatricians in the audience and people interested in care of the elderly know the name of Mary Tinetti. And she wrote this very interesting paper, basically saying that one size fits all is really leads to health inequity. And as I mentioned, the clinical trials are extrapolated from studies in which women, older adults, Black, Hispanic, and other racially minoritized individuals are underrepresented. And so the one-size-fits-all health inequity occurs when data obtained in these non-representative populations and on select sets of interventions and outcomes are assumed to apply to everyone. And I think this is extremely important, but it also means, we take this one step further, it also means that it's not sufficient to develop general programs for health promotion and prevention. If I take the example of hypertension, it means that we need to have programs that will target and be adapted to the communities that need them the most, because otherwise we're just going to be perpetuating the health inequity of people who get the primary and secondary prevention for hypertension and diabetes, for example. So just to finish with a few things from the Quebec Alzheimer Plan and just the approach, I don't have much time to get into it here, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention. There were 3 phases to the plan, which was submitted to the minister in 2009. Implementation began in 2011, and it was anchored in interdisciplinary primary care with supportive specialty care. And there was an implementation plan in phases with a change management strategy and budget. The impact, and I don't want to overplay it, but the impact is the fact that Alzheimer's disease and related disorders are now on the agenda in primary care. And the approach was that we could have taken the approach of the cancer model or the diabetes model. The cancer model, when you see somebody with a cancer, they go to oncology and they stay there. And oncology takes over. Diabetes model in my country, and probably in yours as well, about 80% of people with diabetes are managed in primary care without seeing an endocrinologist, because 80% is typical. And if you look at Alzheimer's disease, probably about 80% is typical as well, and should be managed in primary care. I had the privilege of being a co-founder and co-director with a neurology colleague of mine of one of the McGill University tertiary care memory clinics the best memory clinic in the world, the best in the world, except it took 12 to 18 months to get in. And so maybe the best in the world, but not very useful, because after 12 to 18 months, my daughter, who's in communications and marketing, could have made the diagnosis. So if we want to ensure accessibility to detection, diagnosis, and management, we need to develop the capacity of primary care, just like primary care has developed the capacity in other chronic diseases. And what we've shown is that it's on the agenda and that progress is still uneven and variable, but it's feasible. It's feasible to develop the capacity of primary care to detect, diagnose, and manage the majority of cases with the judicious use of specialty referrals. There was better quality and continuity of care. And by the way, continuity of care comes out as an extremely important factor in quality of care, and in also reducing hospital and emergency room use, and it also improved the management of chronic disease in general. And so now, as I indicated, we're now working on, at the request of the minister, the development of a ministerial policy for Alzheimer's, the first ministerial policy for Alzheimer's disease, which actually ramps up the importance, the visibility, and hopefully the budget of Alzheimer's disease. And here are some of the key themes and contemporary challenges. We're in the beginning of the work that we're working on. Of course, the person-centered approach and living and dying with dignity, a great emphasis on palliative care, on the development of palliative care. Palliative care is still very much focused on cancer. And another important issue in my country is medically assisted dying, and there is discussion and laws in preparation for anticipated medically assisted dying for persons with Alzheimer's disease. I won't go into the details, but raise very important issues and discussion. Recognizing Alzheimer's disease is not just a health, but it's a societal, the health and social issue. The third point is this notion of equity, by recognizing the diversity of the population. So we need to understand the diversity of the populations, as I explained earlier, and develop policies and programs that are targeted and adapted to the diversity of the population, to those the most in need. Third is fourth of brain health promotion and prevention as a realistic and achievable goal. Whether it's 40%, which I think is very high, but let's say it's only 10 or 15% of cases that can be prevented, that's still pretty high and pretty impressive in the face of the increasing numbers that we're going to be seeing with the aging of the population. The hope and the challenge of disruptive innovation, artificial intelligence, the disease-modifying medications, personalized medicine, digital technology. These disruptive innovations we're going to see more and more coming to fruition, moving out into the community with potential benefits, important benefits for persons living with dementia, their caregivers, and also for the clinicians. But they raise challenges as well in terms of the equity, in terms of the some of the ethical issues that are being raised, et cetera. So a very important issue. We need to embrace these disruptive innovations, and we need to also to understand the challenges that come with the disruptive innovations. The notion of continuity of care and continuity in transitions. One of the most difficult issues with Alzheimer's disease and related disorders is because of their complexity, there are many transitions in care and many levels of care, uh, types of professionals involved. And this notion of continuity and personalized support and accompaniment is extremely important. We still feel that it should be anchored in primary community-based care supported by specialist care. The notion of ensuring that where you live is a real choice, so our ability to develop cost-effective, community-based home care services. And finally, the notion of implementation and change management strategy. So these are some of the key elements that will be part of the Alzheimer ministerial policy that is in development. So in conclusion, a rather naive statement, Alzheimer's disease and related disorders are extremely complex with complex etiologies. The present anti-amyloid monoclonal antibody medications, my point of view and shared by many, are at best only marginally effective, and some would say not much more effective than donepezil, and for only a very small proportion of Alzheimer patients. And I suspect it's unlikely, and I'm not an expert, but that a single medication will be effective for all the Alzheimer's diseases that we're going to be discovering as this research continues. So the response will necessarily be multimodal, with contributions from basic science, drug development, epidemiology and population research, public health, health services, health policy and implementation research. And policy must combine all these elements: societal improvements to education, environment, socioeconomic conditions, as well as head trauma, smoking, for example, primary and secondary prevention for the cardiometabolic diseases with risk factor reduction for high-risk groups, the fingers type. We need disease-modifying medication. It's going to be part of the approach in the next 5 to 10 years. And we need to continue to care for persons who will develop dementia in spite of our best efforts in prevention, in spite of the disease-modifying medication. And we need to make sure that people live and die with dignity. Population access and equity are essential within our own countries and globally, as we saw with COVID, in translating evidence into policy and change. And so targeting the population and communities that need it the most with evidence based on their reality. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop my screen sharing and hopefully just begin the conversation with you.
Now I'm on.
I can't hear you. Oh, now I can hear you, yes.
Right. So thank you very much for a very, very realistic talk. That was actually the most realistic talk on Alzheimer's we've had in quite some time. And I guess, let me ask a question. We're, just like in Canada, the U.S. Policies towards care of older, frailer adults and people with dementia varies quite a bit by state. But we're still at a relatively early level in terms of community-based care. Some states, Oregon, and other states are better, but many states have a very high percentage of those people in nursing homes. And I was wondering what we can learn from other countries for example, France, where they have a much stronger home care program, and the various European countries. I mean, I realize that there are issues of equity, but we have to deal with the country we're in. And so I wonder what you think about models in some of the other Western countries.
So I think what you just said is extremely important, that we can learn from each other, but models can't be imported or exported. What could work in France won't work in Canada, won't work in United States. Somehow, as I said, the healthcare budget and health and social care budget, as any budget, is limited, and the question of how we shift resources, because all our systems really began and continue to develop based on hospital medicine. How we shift those resources into community-based care is not a simple issue. COVID, I think, in my country at least, taught us that the importance of high-tech hospital care, but it also taught us the risk and dangers of over-reliance on hospital care. And so, getting back to your question, I don't have an answer to that question except to say that there is at some point a cost effectiveness to investing in community-based care rather than increasing the number of nursing home beds and increasing the number of other types of alternative living arrangements outside the home. And I think that the countries that we always look to some of the Scandinavian countries, we can import their models, but the real issue is how we can shift those resources or develop resources that will be used in the community. In certain countries, they developed long-term care insurance. There was an attempt to do it in our country. It didn't really succeed, unfortunately. But that's where the question is going to be. It seems like it's easier to invest in buildings for nursing homes than in home care.
Right. So questions for the audience, and also remind people online that they're to use the chat feature. Okay. And questions from the audience will be somewhat of a screening test for early dementia. We're actually, in that you have to hold the microphone, you have to hold it down the whole time. Only if you follow the 17 directions. Yeah, just keep there you go.
It's my impression that animal proteins have a problem with being degraded to the point that the brain cannot really comprehend it anymore, and it will be reduced to a toxin.
Okay.
And the result of that is that's what I do. When I was advised that things like animal protein are apt to make you subject to Alzheimer's,
okay,
more so than many other possible problems.
Okay. Did you hear that, Dr. Bergman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm not sure I understood the question completely, but I think your suggestion that diet may be a contributing factor, and in fact, there is some evidence that people who, for example, the Mediterranean diet may contribute to lowering the risk for Alzheimer's disease. This may be through lowering the risk for cardiometabolic factors. So nutrition is yes going to be a very important part of a prevention strategy.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bergman, for the thought-provoking presentation. I know it's late there, so I'll try to keep it short.
It's okay.
You mentioned that, well, you mentioned that most Alzheimer research has been based in high-income countries, but you also mentioned that we have to keep on check what is happening in low and middle-income countries. Considering that those countries are aging at a faster pace than the high-income countries, and also they might be dealing with population decline in a not so distant future. Do you think that it's possible that the levels of Alzheimer prevalence there might be something that is like a completely new scenario, like unseen to this day? Or you think like it will get to a more like a convergence with the high-income countries? Thank you.
So I think I had the chance to look at some data. The low middle income countries are aging very rapidly. I remember one statistic that I saw that compared France to Mexico, going from, I don't know, 5% over 65 to 20% over 65. The exact numbers are not important, but France took about 400 years, Mexico 40 years. So the aging population, and because of improved sanitation, improved public health in middle and even low income countries, people are living longer, people are living with chronic diseases, and because of that, we're seeing an increase in Alzheimer's disease. So no doubt about it, in the middle income countries, I was looking at stats from China, Thailand, Latin America, that the numbers are just astounding. I read somewhere where I think it was an American sociologist who said, but talking about China, is the West developed first, then aged, whereas China and other middle-income countries are aging and developing at the same time. So this is going to be, and I come back to the issue of health promotion and prevention. It has to be the cornerstone, and community-based care has to be the cornerstone for low and middle income countries, as it is for our high income countries. The cost of the present potentially so-called disease-modifying medications and the level of technology required is going to make it essentially useless for most low and middle income countries, except for a few very, very, very small percentage of the population. So yes, an extremely important, as we saw with COVID, right? An extremely important issue.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Can't leave this wonderful conference, although it's been very academic, without saying that I just hope everybody in Galveston realizes the treasure we have in Libby's Place Senior Day program. Many of the people have dementia. Some have other things, but Alice Williams at the door was the first executive director. But what an amazing program with pet therapy, music, some religious, a master gardener, garden area outside. For veterans, they hoist the flag when they can. And also some medical people from UTMB,
Right.
different people go. So I just have to comment that Galveston does have a supremely wonderful program for people with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been to Galveston, Dr. Bergman, but it's a relatively small city. It's a big island, small city, maybe 45,000 people or so.
Okay.
But it was the biggest city in Texas about 130 years ago, and there was a lot of banking money and stuff like that. And so we actually, with foundations and just because we've been here so long, we have some really quite wonderful community programs, including like one that was here for many, many years for head trauma and closed head injuries, and as she was talking about, the daycare Alzheimer program. And we have many more too, which we're really grateful for.
No, I haven't been to Galveston yet, but I think what this lady just said highlights the importance of the multimodal approach.
Right.
We're going to get better at prevention. We're going to have at some point some disease-modifying medications. But we know that there's going to continue to be people who develop Alzheimer's disease. And we need to think of the type of treatment and interventions that are non-pharmacological but are absolutely necessary and improve the quality of life, improve the potential of the people living with dementia, and certainly improve the quality of life of their caregivers. And so I think that intervention of this person in the audience, I think, highlights, again, the importance of multimodal approach. And we have to be careful of not just focusing on one aspect of the intervention for Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you. And on that note, I think we will close the last Winter Series lecture of the 29th year of the Winter Series on Aging. Thank you very much, Dr. Bergman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and best of luck. Bye-bye.